The storms over Kepler Station were mean tonight. Long ropes of charged dust dragging static across the domes until they glowed like bruised lanterns. The air smelled of iron and recycled breath. Cargo mechs clanked through the mist. People kept their heads low, coats tight, eyes colder than the steel under their boots. Vira stood alone at Dock 47, where the Reclamation Corps lined up recruits and made picks like traders choosing livestock. She didn't fidget. She didn't plead. She had a travel crate with a pair of boots, a blanket, and a coil of wire she kept from a job once, the only thing that never broke on her. She stood very still, and because she was taller than everyone else by a head and a half, the stillness made her look like a blade stuck in the deck. A cargo foreman handed out tags. Crew chiefs stalked down the line, pointing, snapping orders, yanking their choices into shuttles. Some glanced at Vira and looked away quickly, the way people look at the sun and pretend it is nothing. Too tall, one man murmured to another, voice not soft enough. Won't fit the suits, won't fit the bunks. We're not building statues, the other said. We're building survivors. Shuttles sealed, engines groaned, the line shrank. Vira remained. When the last crew chief barked for the hatch to close on the last ship, a boxy war freighter with its name Talon's Edge hand-etched along a scorched panel, a voice cut through the hiss of the seal. Calm, low, not a question. Hold the hatch. Vira turned. A human captain stood in the fog, coat blown backward by the pressure wash, black and gold insignia catching the blue lights. He was older than the rest, with cut wire lines around his mouth and eyes like a man who knew what pain sounded like when it had no mouth. He looked up to meet Vira's eyes without flinching, as if he'd been waiting on purpose for the tallest person in a cruel galaxy. You, he said. Gear. Now. Vira lifted the crate and moved. No one stopped her. The foreman shook his head, the crew chief shrugged. The captain reached a hand toward the hatch and Vira stepped past him, ducking, even though she did not need to. She passed him too close not to notice the heat radiating off him like a reactor. She did not look back. The hatch shut with finality. The captain followed her down the narrow corridor and said without ceremony, "Commander Hale." Then he pointed once. Bunk 5, hands to rails in a burn. The Talon's Edge shuddered free. Kepler Station fell behind like an old scar that would not heal, and the stars gathered, cold and bright. Vira strapped in where she was told, tucked her long legs into angles that ached, and learned how the ship sang. It sang like an animal that had learned to speak. Fans and pressure regulators and the whispering drone of patched engines. The chorus of survival played in a key only tired people hear. The crew was 12 souls, counting the captain and the ship itself. They were not warm, they were efficient. They watched her with the thin eyes of soldiers, measuring, not judging. Then they went back to work. That first night, Vira lay awake in the narrow bunk with her ankles hanging over the edge and listened to hull metal ping as it cooled and thought about height the way she had learned to think of it years ago. As a truth, not a sin. They ran salvage routes in dead lanes where wrecks drifted like dark islands. They towed capsules, vacuum-scrubbed habitats, pulled micro-factories from frozen vans near Jovian storms. Nothing touched Vira. No jokes, no insults, no "hey, tree." She was a void in the crew's conversation because they did not know what to do with a person who could reach the ceiling with her palm and did not bend when pressure asked nicely. On the 7th run, Hale found her in the observation corridor. She had braced her shoulders against the angled glass to take weight off her back. Stars slid along her eyes, and for a moment she looked carved from the night. "You're quiet," Hale said, stopping beside her without invading the small space such a tall person learns to defend. "I work better that way." He nodded as if that was the correct answer. Silence held. The ship hummed. Vira leaned a little closer to the window. "Why did you pick me?" she asked, and she did not try to soften the words. He did not soften either. "Because you didn't lower your head when I walked up. That's all. It's all that matters to me," he said. In a fire, heads drop, eyes drop. People lie to themselves and call it survival. I need those who do not change height for fear. Vira looked at him then, really looked. He was shorter than she had guessed at the dock, but around him space seemed taller somehow, as if he carried room with him. "Then you have what you need," she said. "We'll see," he replied. "First hard test is 2 hours away." He left her there with the ship's heartbeat in her bones. 2 hours later they burned toward a ghost. The Yo's dawn drifted on the edge of Threx territory like a cathedral frozen in an ice field. A century gone. 30,000 souls never reported home. The Corps had triangulated her distress signal for years, but the Threx border moved like storm lines. Now there was a window. Hale took it with a gambler's calm and a veteran's hate. They docked on a fractured port, cut through a chain of seized locks, and stepped into a ship preserved by vacuum and cold. Vira floated through corridors tall enough that she did not have to crouch. The dead walls did not mind her height. She moved like she had always been here, as if every long stride had been planned for this isle and the people around her. Human, scarred, small in bulky suits, looked like memories trying to keep up. The Yo's dawn still defended itself. 3 minutes past the primary bulkhead, a turret stirred awake in a nest of frost and spat tungsten like night raindrops. The team split behind fractured beams. The medic fell, chest opened by metallic teeth. Vira did not think. She did not breathe. She punched off the wall hard enough to dent her shoulder plate, shot through a maintenance chute that would have pinched any other soldier at the hips, and hit the drone nest from the blind side. With one long reach, she tore the conduit out by its root and jammed the live wire into the weapon's spine. Lightning ate the dead sentry and burned the air. Silence returned, burned smell, frozen fog drifting like ghosts kissing goodbye. Hale crossed to the medic and closed his eyes with 2 fingers. His voice over comms was level. "We proceed. We do not stop for pain, we stop for the living." They went on. In the Corps, the team found what the Corps wanted and what the Threx feared. The black box was not black. It was clear crystal, latticed with human script and alien symbology, Threx phonemes cut like blades. Vira's visor HUD translated enough to make her stomach close up. Cooperative colony, it read. Shared codes, shared water, shared air. Old friends, old enemies. The way war was built from misremembered love. The Threx arrived with the speed of a thrown knife. Organic warship, hooks, tendrils. The Talon's edge recoiled as the enemy latched and the hull shook like an animal pulling against a chain. Boarding alarms hammered the crew's ears. Hale's order cracked across every channel. Extract and burn, we do not lose what we came for. In the corridors of the dead, fighting woke like a bad dream. Vira moved where the team broke. Her height became leverage, reach, speed. She stored her rifle on her back and fought with hands and boots and the kind of hate that can only exist without words. Threx warriors spilled from hatchways, their bodies an ugly grace of spines and muscle, their chrome-black eyes bright with the beauty of war. Vira hit them high, crushed spine joints, ripped knife arms from roots, used their own momentum against them like a planet against a meteor. They were too many. A bulkhead cracked under the enemy's clawed mass and fell across the corridor like a guillotine. Hale went down. Vira saw him vanish in sparks. Fire suppression died and oxygen did its hungry work. She ran toward the heat and heard him shouting through smoke. "Vira, out." "Not yet," she said, and her voice sounded like a building refusing to collapse. She wedged her body under the beam with a groan that seemed to come from the ship itself and lifted. Back muscles tore, knees shook. She did not think about physics. She thought about height and how some things must be held tall by will alone. The beam rose an inch, another. Hale slid out on torn elbows, rolled, grabbed her shoulder. A spear arm exploded from the fire. It punched through Vira's suit meat and metal in a straight line. She did not scream. She dragged the Threx in by its weapon until its mouth was at her helmet. "Too tall to fall," she whispered, breath fogging the glass, and then she snapped its head. The body went boneless with a wet clatter. They made it to the hatch, bodies ahead and behind falling in ones and twos. The Talon's edge peeled from the Yo's dawn, engines at unsafe thrust, physics complaining like an old priest. The enemy ship hurled a spear of plasma toward their spine. Hale turned the ship with a move that left paint and skin on the void. The spear missed. They ran. Vira survived. The medbay AI told her politely that she should not have. Hale sat beside her while she rerouted pain into a quiet corner of her face. He did not hold her hand. He held the room with her, which was better. "You saved my life," he said eventually. "You picked me," she answered. The rest followed. He smiled with a tired triumph no one could take. "We're not done." They weren't. Because the crystal told a story, and stories are the most dangerous cargo in the galaxy. Within weeks, quietly and then with the noise of war, people realized what the data meant. Humanity and Threx had once chosen each other. They had shared the air the way lovers share a blanket, both believing there would always be enough warmth for two. Then newer words, profit, fear, directives, had closed that blanket and called it a flag. The Threx wanted that history dead. Humanity wanted it back. Between them there would be fire. Hale kept the Talon's edge moving. He moved like a chess player who played by ear. Vira learned the ship until she could tell when a port fusion valve thought about failing by the way the deck vibrated through her heels. She learned to duck through hatches without thinking. She learned where to lean so the bruises made a map across her shoulders like constellations. Their jobs became rescues, relays to keep messages alive. Evacuations when the message failed. The enemy took Europa Station on a winter day that had no temperature because space does not care about your calendar. Hale was running shuttles 4 at a time through debris and fire. Vira led the last unit off Habitat Ring C when the Threx flooded the corridor. Her knees bled through her suit. She had a child on one arm and a crate of memories on the other. Someone's hard drives, someone's life, and she still found the balance to kick an attacker sideways into a pressure door before it sealed. "Commander," she said through broken comms, final ring evacuating. "You have a clear line." Hale's voice, compressed iron, clear enough. Flames went silent in the vacuum as the outer shield cracked. Vira turned once. For one moment she looked small because the universe is big. Then she looked tall because some humans are bigger inside than outside, and the inside leaks out through the eyes. Afterward, people told different stories about Europa. Some said Vira died there, holding a corridor with a rifle that never cooled, her back to a viewport where ice glittered like diamonds. Others swore rescue teams pulled her broken body from melted deck plates 3 days later, and she woke in a med bay without speaking and walked out before anyone could record her name. Hale did not correct them. He only kept flying toward places where darkness corkscrewed down like a drill, looking for the noise she made when she breathed. The phantom rumors began. Tall human, too tall, moves like a storm over flat land, appears where the enemy eats hope, leaves nothing but silence with a different shape. The Threx gave her a name in their war oral, Zinthrual, which meant the long echo through a hollow ship. Hale's crew half believed. They teased themselves with it around ration tables when the engines cooled, and the smell of boiled coffee tried to fight the smell of scorched wiring. They'd lose 2 people on a job and mourn in the way soldiers mourn, by repairing things, by not discussing the moments when their hands shook. And then someone would say carefully, "Remember the echo," and the room would change. Hale never said no. He simply pointed at the star lines and told them to hold another speed. If anyone had asked Vira who she was by then, she might have said, "No one picked me until a human saw me at height." She might have added, "Now I pick. Now I pick the lines where others fall." The Second War opened like a mouth widened by a scream. Systems fell. Others rose in stubborn light. The talon's edge carried the crystal's truth in thousands of copied bits across secure beams, into the hands of people on both sides who had been waiting to live correct history again. The Threx responded with knife ships and hive torches. They believed the past must be sealed in a grave too heavy to ever dig. They did not understand. Humans bring shovels to funerals. On the 4th month, Hale got a call from an old friend on a black channel. The message was a corridor of static punched by one clear line of words. They're going for Lighten Gate. Lighten Gate was not a place. It was a coil bigger than any ship, built by a consortium of species as a promise to the future, a stable path to somewhere farther than fear. The Threx wanted to crack it open and poison it to prove that no road would lead away from them. Hale set a course that burned the engine fins blue-white. The crew did not ask for orders. They prepped. They strapped. Vira checked the anchor clamps on the coilgun batteries 3 times and then a 4th, because if something failed under her hands, it would not be because she had not reached far enough or cared hard enough. They arrived to chaos. The gate hung in a crown of dead light. Threx ships circled like eels around a drowned city. Human defenders bled. A civilian cluster, the families of the gate engineers, spun helplessly, their thrusters dead. Hale did not choose glory, he chose the cluster. Get them behind us, he told Vira. Give me engines on the red line and weapons we can trust. Yes, sir, she said, and there was something old in the words, something like vow. The talon's edge slid between enemy teeth and placed its battered hull in the way of an enormous amount of hate. Vira aimed the coilguns and chose her shots with that quiet of hers, the quiet of a person who holds their breath long underwater and counts their heartbeats like steps. She cut tendrils, tore hooks, stripped skin from monsters. At one point, the starboard battery failed with a grunt like a punched horse. Vira broke from the cradle and ran down a spine of the ship that vibrated with fear. She used her height the way a climber uses rope, swinging between support rings, grabbing a manual lever no one else could reach without a ladder. She reset the feed by hand while bolts sang around her head. She returned coated in powdered metal and kept shooting. The Threx pushed. The defenders held the line as if each of them was the last plank in a bridge over a flood. Hale called patterns that sounded like math if math had muscles. Through the viewport, Vira saw the civilian cluster drift behind them, slowly turning, children pressing faces to glass they were not supposed to touch, eyes wide at the gunfire like meteors. Then the enemy moved differently. They drew back as if on a signal, and from the shadow behind the gate something vast approached. Not a ship, a factory beast. It extruded drones as it came, a womb of killing machines. If it reached the gate, it would nest there. The future would clog. People would say years later that the road had never existed. Hale looked at the thing and sighed, a long exhale as prisoners breathe when they remember how air works. We can't kill it, he said, but we can make it choose us instead of the gate. He told the crew the plan. No one argued. Vira didn't nod. She wanted to. The motion felt too small. They would ram, not suicidally, cleverly. The talon's edge would pretend to be broken, drift in, and at the last second swing its belly to flash every heat signature it had. The factory would mouth to swallow them. In that instant, a breath, Vira would launch the last of the coilgun slugs with a payload the medbay AI had politely warned them would likely kill their engines for good. The slugs would change the magnetic throat of the factory as it opened. Not damage. Different. The wrong kind of difference for the machine to digest. It would gag, it would recoil. The human defenders would get 3 minutes. In war, 3 minutes is a generation. The talon's edge killed outward lights. It bobbed in like debris the way dead things move when currents tug. Vira strapped into the gun harness and adjusted the shoulder brace as far as it would go, and still it bit her collarbone. She smiled because sometimes pain is the punctuation at the end of the sentence. I am here. The moment came. The factory's mouth opened. A flower of knives. Hale swung the ship. The heat signatures popped like flares to say, "Look at me." The maw flared wider in greed. Vira fired, the slugs flew. The payload sang the wrong song in the monster's metal throat. It convulsed. For a breath it forgot how to eat. "Now," Hale said, and the defenders moved like wolves smelling blood. They tore into the drones. They carved the mother's spines. Civilians slid clear of the line and lit their emergency sails and were gone. The factory shuddered, learned, and corrected. A spear formed, aimed at the Talon's edge, and it fired. The spear was a river approaching a house. Hale could have dodged. He could have taken the hit on empty space and prayed. Instead, he pointed the nose straight at the oncoming light. "Brace," he said, voice easy, and Vira closed her teeth and bore down. The weapon hit the ship in the mouth. Everything came apart in white noise and black silence. When the crew woke, they woke because gravity had failed and the human body is terrible at flying. Ribs hurt. The world had angles it shouldn't. Alarms tried to speak and stuttered. Hale dangled from a restraint, blinking blood from one eye. Vira floated across a bay that had widened by 1 meter because the wall had decided to be honest about stress. "We're not dead," someone rasped, a small laugh, a little hysterical. Yet, Hale said, "Report. Engines gone, power low, oxygen decent, hull untrustworthy." Around them the battle had moved on, dragging itself across a different patch of sky. The factory beast limped, surprised and guarded by a shrinking ring of drones. The defenders had taken their 3 minutes and stretched them into 5. Somewhere in that 5, history had a chance. "Signals?" Hale asked. "Faint. Mostly clamps and screams," came the reply. Vira pushed off a bulkhead and drifted to a broken panel. She pulled it free like a bandage you don't want to look under and saw what she hated to see. A manual access deep behind piping, set for someone shorter, not for anyone who could reach from one side of the ship to the other without moving her feet. "I can fix it," she said. Hale looked at the gap. He looked at her arm length and the way her shoulders squeezed past painful into spaces meant for smaller bodies. He shook his head. "It's a crush channel, Vira." "Then let it crush," she said, grinning with the lightness of a person who has already made the decision and now enjoys the world again. He caught her ankle with one hand as she slid in. For a second their eyes were very close. "Too tall to fall," he said softly, and it was a blessing. Her smile sharpened, too human to bow. She wriggled into the crawl, pipes sang. Metal ground along her ribs like teeth. She turned her shoulders sideways, flexed, reached. The manual breaker handle sat 2 handspans beyond normal reach, installed by some engineer who assumed no one would ever need it or that if they did, ladders would still exist. Vira forced her right shoulder past a bolt. Her suit fabric tore, skin tore. Heat prickled and then went cool as the air stole the wet away. She reached again and caught the edge of the handle with fingertips that already knew they would bleed later. She pulled. The handle moved a millimeter. She exhaled. She pulled again. Systems thrummed. The ship's remaining power rerouted. Somewhere far away, a pump remembered its purpose and began to hum like an old song. Hale's voice, strained and triumphant. "That's my giant." Vira backed out slow, scraping shreds of herself on the way like an offering. When she dropped free, the world looked slightly farther away, as if she now stood taller inside. "Can we run?" she asked. Hale looked at the boards. He looked at the factory beast, the defenders, the born line of the gate. "We can choose," he said, "which is the same as running when you're lucky." They limped toward the defender line, bleeding light, and in their wake the factory heaved. In minutes, Allied ships reached to tow them. The enemy tried to cut the rope. Vira sat behind a manual turret and with a crank and an old optical sight, plinked drones out of the sky like a grandmother shooting wasps off a porch. She laughed once, quiet, surprised by the joy of competence, and someone beside her began to cry for the first time in months, because sometimes you need to hear laughter next to broken windows to remember you are allowed to be. Light and Gate lived, not by a glorious siege, not by a legendary hero, by a dozen ships and one broken freighter and an engineer's manual handle that did not expect a hand like hers. Stories differ on what matters. War only counts results. The result was a road still open where people could walk out into a new sky. Word spread, as it always does. The tall human who would not bow. The freighter that chose to be a wall for a few minutes so others could be a door. The echo rumor became something else, not a ghost but a direction. The next time a station's power failed and screams rose, people began to turn their heads by reflex, looking for height in the smoke. The Threx didn't enjoy superstition. They preferred certainty. So they sent certainty to kill the rumor, a hunter-class priest, armored in the sacred carapace of command. It moved with the grace of a terrible question. It hunted with logic like a scalpel. It anticipated human routes. It chose from 1,000 data lines. The ship that should die to prove the story was only story. It found the Talon's edge in a belt of dark rock and moved in for the quiet kill. Its first shot clipped the freighter's hull and turned a corridor into mist. Hale's bones hummed. Vira's teeth rang. They didn't wait for a second shot. Hale directed, Vira fought. The crew became a body with many hands and one will. They dragged broken panels into place as shields. They fired back with magnet fists that bruised a predator. The Threx priest wove between rocks with insulting casualness and came across their bow to open them from nose to tail. Ready to ram? Someone asked, voice too bright. Not today, Hale said. Today we teach. They slalomed through rock. Vira took manual thrusters, pushing her long hands into physical levers that had been meant as backups and now became primary. She leaned her weight into the sticks as if the ship were a beast under her thighs. She whispered to it. It listened, because things that survive together begin to understand language. They used the debris as armor. The enemy angled to cut them into chastisement. Hale smiled the way a tired man smiles when a sandstorm meets a low wall. Rotate on my mark, he said. Vira, give me a quarter-second burn on 3 ports when I say the word now. What if I miss a port? She asked. You won't. He counted backward. Now she fired. The Talon's edge swung in a move a better ship would have refused. The enemy priest slid past too close to stop its own weight. They kissed metal to metal with a force that made the stars flinch. The freighter's nose sheared. The priest's flank cracked. Vira's ribs lit up like lamps. The enemy recoiled, stunned that a prey animal had put its teeth on the hunter's throat. Again, someone said wild. Again, Hale agreed, very calm. They hit and turned, a dance of ugly grace. By the 4th impact, the priest's sacred armor hung open like a ripped garment. It pumped heat to cauterize wounds and discovered pain. That shocked it. Threx priests believed pain was for those below them. Message sent, Hale said. Time to live. They broke for open space. The enemy struggled to pursue. It would learn to hate them another day. They limped to a small station built into an old comet. Locals patched them with love and glue while the war rolled past beyond the ice. Vira stood outside in a suit on the shaded surface and watched reflections on the belly of the gate coil in the distance while Hale floated beside her, boots maglocked to the old iron. You could have left me at Kepler, she said, not because she needed to say it, but because sometimes you put a stone back in your hand to remember how heavy it felt the first time. I didn't, he said. They said I was too tall. They were wrong, he said, then after a moment quietly, but we needed them to be wrong. She looked down. Their reflections in the suit visors were strange, 2 figures star-etched, stretched by curve. She reached out a gloved hand and chopped a small piece of ice from the comet. It floated between them like a thought. What do you need from me now? She asked. He turned that steady gaze on her. Keep not bowing, he said. People are watching. So she did. Headphone, if you're enjoying this story, take a second to like and subscribe. It really helps keep humanity's stories alive among the stars. War did what war always does. Made children old and old people small. Stations became stopovers for grief with coffee. Ships passed each other in night like strangers pretending not to be cousins, but in the cracks, new seeds threw roots. On the margins of Lighten, small boats with Threx and human crews ran together under false names to move medicine to places that didn't ask who you used to fight for. On the edge of the Perseus Arm, an old monastery opened its doors to anyone who brought a working generator and a vow to keep their knives outside. The world chiseled a new shape for itself without waiting for permission. The Talon's edge kept serving, and the rumor person kept showing when needed. Once Vira pulled an engineer out from under a collapsed mast driver at Lighten's sister gate, her hands burrowing into white-hot metal like a desperate mother, and coming out bloody and blistered, but full of human life. Another time she walked into a riot at a freeport where Threx refugees had been penned and pushed back the angry crowd without weapons, only posture and the relentless gravity of a human who will not make her shape smaller to fit someone else's fear. People stopped because sometimes you do not need a gun. You need someone to stand exactly as large as they are and ask you to become that size too. By the 9th month of the war, the enemy adapted. They built traps baited with children's voices. They jammed slipspace cords so nav computers sang nonsense, and ships got lost in the equivalent of a small room. In one such trap, the Talon's edge dropped from slip and found a cloud of human escape pods breathing their last air into a quiet dark. Hale did the math with his mouth flat. If they took everyone aboard, they would not have enough oxygen to live long enough to regret it. If they left anyone, the crew of those pods died now instead of tomorrow. He looked at Vira. She looked at him. The crew looked at them because in a small boat, choices are communal even when they feel singular. We can chain them, Vira said. One to another, we tow. We cycle air through the line, we lose speed. We don't lose them. It won't be enough air, someone whispered. The numbers are real, Hale said, a captain who respects math even as he defies it. But we are two. They chained 13 pods to the freighter's tail with lines meant for cargo. Vira went suit out, leaping between pods like a diver crossing a river, fingers working quick and sure on bolts and clamps that had frozen. The pod windows were eyes. Some of those eyes were already closed. When she reached the last pod, the face behind the glass was a Threx child with round black eyes like night pearls. She pressed a glove to the glass. The child mirrored the touch with long fingers splayed. Vira tied the pod gently the way you tie a ribbon onto a branch. They towed, the ship growled. They cycled air through the line with a rig that should not have worked. People breathed. Some stopped breathing anyway. Others began. The Threx child lived. Vira slept in a chair near the manual flow valve and woke every 9 minutes to nudge it with a long finger so the red light would go back to not tread. When they reached a safe harbor, the harbor nearly fired on them. Threx pod, enemy debris, unknown ship. Hale spoke into the radio with the tired calm of a man who has been arguing for the right to be human for too long. "We are all alive here," he said. "Do not make me prove it." The guns went quiet. The harbor opened. Hands reached. For 1 hour, the universe pretended to be kind. After, in a room that smelled of disinfectant, Vira sat on the floor with her knees drawn up like a child too big for the desk at school and watched the Threx child sleep. Hale eased into the room and stood in the doorway for a while, listening to the ragged breath of hope. "You all right?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. "Me neither," he said. They did not move. It was enough to admit the wound without picking at it. Peace did not arrive. It rarely does. But a question spread, carried by data and rumor and the sight of a tall human standing where others bent. The question was simple. It is always simple when you pull the fancy skin off. It asked, if we once chose each other, can we choose that again? If the answer is no, must it be no everywhere at once? The enemy priest they had wounded answered with rage. It began a personal war. It hunted the Talon's edge through staggers of slip space and memory. It closed corridors, poisoned fuel sources, and filled comm bands with the meticulous disdain of a theologian. Return the crystal. Admit your fiction. Kneel. No one on the ship needed to ask whose kneecaps the priest wanted. Vira smiled without humor and whispered to no one in particular, "I don't bend." "Good," Hale said, "because I'm poor at scraping friends off decks." The last hunt was at a place called the Black Porch, a stretch of empty where gravity goes to think. The priest waited. The Talon's edge stumbled in, engines coughing metal. The trap folded. Minds reached like hands. The crew accepted the cost without theatrics. Feet to station, shoulder to the wheel. If we die, we do it while making the enemy remember us every time it tries to sleep. Hale had one play left. It wasn't clever, it was human. "We burn the reactor," he said. "Won't that kill us?" Someone asked. "Yes," he said. "If we do it wrong, if we do it right, it will look like it will kill us and the priest will move to harvest. Then we direct the vent into its mouth and we run behind the light." "Manual control," Vira asked, already unstrapping, already tall. "Manual," Hale confirmed. The path to the reactor throat was a series of spaces too small for someone with proper vertebrae. Vira went anyway. She scraped skin she would need later, and the ship drank iron from her blood and made it part of itself. In the throat, the heat spoke in a low voice. It asked if she knew she was mortal. She ignored it like a familiar teacher. She set the manual gates to half open. She braced in a position no one would want to be found dead in. She called Hale. "Ready." "On 3, he said gently, because it feels wrong to count like that over the edge of a cliff. 3, 2, 1. The Talon's edge screamed a sun through its belly. Light flared, not quite the color of fire. The enemy priest saw a dying ship and lunged in righteous hunger. Vira swung the vent gate with a long, steady haul that made every tendon in her arms feel too short. The vent kissed the enemy's open mouth and poured star into prayer. The priest staggered. Its armor cracked with a sound like argument losing. Vira's hair crisped under her hood. She smiled anyway because pain meant it worked. "Run," Hale said, voice taut. They ran. Behind them, a thing that believed it could not be harmed swallowed too much truth at once and gagged itself into quiet. The Black Porch absorbed the echo. The Talon's edge shuddered like a tired animal finding a second wind. It carried its people toward a light that might have been a station or might have been only hope. In the days that followed, messages crossed old lines. A Threx envoy reached Lighton with a flag not white, not black, gray like metal before you decide what to hammer it into. The crystal's contents played in a hall built to make sound bend. People listened. They thought about water shared and code shared and air shared, and for a brief aching heartbeat something like peace looked possible, not by miracle, by endurance. Vira watched from the edge of the hall, too large for the chairs, refusing to sit on the steps because she had done enough of her life on the ground already. Children in the hall pointed at her and whispered to parents who hushed them kindly and answered questions with the new caution of the honest. She let them look. She did not perform. She was a pillar, and pillars are only noticed when they break or when someone remembers what holds the roof. After the envoy left, after handshakes that were not yet bridge building but were not knives, Hale stood beside her. He smelled like engine oil because dignity and grease have always been cousins. "You did that," he murmured. "No," she said, "we did." He tilted his head. "We don't have many words for tallness that doesn't make others small." "Make some," she said. "That's a captain's job." He laughed once low. "All right, how about this? You held and that made room." She rolled the word in her mouth. Held, not conquered, not crushed, not even led. Held, a human word. A door made of bone and will. A week later, the priest returned, rebuilt from fury. It slit the throat of a small relay where the original EO's dawn codes were housed for replication. It wanted to show the galaxy that human endurance was a performance without stage. Hale and his crew answered the call as if it were their name. The relay was a skeleton with lights. The priest came with scripture and spears. The Talon's edge came with patched hull and people who had learned to live as a single shape. They fought in a space where radio went static and visuals went blind. Hale steered by the sound of metal complaining in a language he'd learned from Vira. "I can take one more bolt, Captain. 2, if necessary." Vira moved in void like a person who had grown up there. She jumped from ship's skin to enemy spine with a tether that would have terrified anyone else and felt like a belt to her. She was long enough to reach across fault lines. She planted shaped charges by hand. In her ear, Hale's voice counted down. She kicked off. Her tether went taut. The charges breathed. The enemy sang a shocked note and began to come apart. "Boarding parties incoming," someone warned. "Let them," Vira said, and there was no bravado in it, only tired duty. They came as a tide. She waited. She did not have clever lines. She had elbows and knees and a heart with a fracture line that let light through. She shielded a comms tech with her body and took a blade meant for someone too small to duck. She stood anyway. She pushed the enemy back step by step until they decided the Talon's edge was not a ship but a disease and left to cut their losses. In the burning dark after, the priest called across a narrow band with a voice full of shards. "Kneel," it said, "you are broken." Vira leaned against a bulkhead speckled with her own blood and didn't wipe her mouth. "Listen," she said, and her voice carried like a long note in an old hall. "There is a fact you don't understand. We are not afraid of tall people. We ask them to hold the ceiling." Silence. Then the connection cut. An enemy forced to think. The relay lived. The codes spread. The rumor settled into a reality you could hand to a child. Some humans stand taller when you push them. That is for you, little one. When the world tells you to be smaller to fit the room, make the room larger. Sometimes the way you do that is by refusing to bend your neck when fear asks. Hale, too, learned from the war a lesson he did not expect. It came to him one night when he found Vira asleep in the observation corridor with her long legs crossed tight and her head tilted at an angle that would hurt a normal person in minutes. He fetched a rolled blanket and slid it under her shoulders without waking her. He stood there and did something rare for him. He wept, quietly, in gratitude and exhaustion, and an apology to the universe for every time he had wanted a human to be a different size than they were. The war wound down not with a treaty signed under fireworks, with a series of stops, raids that didn't happen, ships that turned around, orders delayed forever, widows who received one less letter. The priest finally died in a skirmish far away. Someone sent Hale a crackly message. It had been destroyed by a civilian convoy that refused to drop cargo and instead used their mass like a fist. Their leader had been tall, details blurred, truth sharpened. You could smell the work of one rumor becoming a culture. Years later, when they told the story, people liked different parts. Some loved the part where a human lifted a beam with a spear through her shoulder and decided she was too tall to fall. Others loved the part where she rerouted air quietly in the middle of the night for children who would never know her name. Some loved the part where a ship decided to live in a way that turned a captain into a man who could hold a room with his kindness, the way he once held it with his orders. They left out the bathroom doors too low to pass through without bruises. They left out the bunk where feet hung past the edge every night for years. They left out the long moments sitting on floors because chairs were a grief. Humans do this when telling stories, shave down the hard parts that are not cinematic, but the people who were there remembered, and they built taller doors, and chairs with longer legs, and bunks you didn't have to fold yourself into like origami. Small things that are actually monuments. One day something like peace arrived. It knocked and waited politely instead of breaking in. Hale stepped aside to let younger captains wear coats heavier than they realized and took a position in a quiet orbital where he taught navigation to people with different heights, literal and otherwise. Vira didn't retire. She couldn't. She merely slowed enough to see the view. She walked along the edge of the lightened gate and watched ships pass, some with Threx script on their hulls next to human names. When children asked for stories, she told them about stars that sounded like bell chimes when the hull cooled and about ice groaning under old light. She never called herself a hero, she called herself crew. Someone once asked her carefully, not to put them on the spot, "When no one picked you, what did you think?" She looked at her long hands, at the way the tendons moved like lines pulled taut on a sail. "I thought I would have to build my own door. Then a man did not ask me to be small. He let me be the door." "What if he hadn't?" the person whispered. "Then I would have found another way," she said, not as bravado but as physics. "Because that is what we do." On the day a monument was unveiled to the unknown crew of the Eo's dawn, a ring of crystal and steel half buried in soil under a sky that had never known war, Vira stood at the back. Hale stood beside her. The crowd was a low tide along the grass. The snow line on the far mountains looked like salt on a dark table. Somewhere in the wind, a child laughed and a dog barked, and someone whispered a prayer in a language that had been old when Earth still counted seasons. They didn't clap at the end. They didn't cheer. They stood, many sizes, many shapes, some too tall for the hats they had bought, some too small for the expectations dropped onto them like boxes. They stood and listened to the wind move through the monument and make a sound like a bow on a string. It was a long sound. It was an echo. If you leaned your head just right, you could hear within it other sounds. A reactor's hum, a captain's sigh, the stiff exhale of a person squeezing through a metal throat to reach a lever that would give strangers 3 more minutes to live. Hale wiped his nose on his sleeve and didn't care who saw. He cleared his throat as if to speak and then didn't, which was the correct choice. Vira didn't move. When night came, the monument glowed with stored daylight. Ships slid overhead like fish in deep water, their lights thin and clean. In a small voice from somewhere in the dark, a child asked, "Mama, is that the tall lady?" Someone lied kindly, "Maybe." Vira smiled small. Hale heard it in the dark and smiled too. They stood that way until the cold told them it was time to go home. The galaxy did not end. It did not explode. It did not burst into choir. It kept on hurting in places and healing in others. But it learned one more word. It learned how to say thank you to height without demanding the world shrink to balance it. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, thank you for listening. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.